Try not to laugh at this episode.
Wait, are you being like? Are you being serious?
No laughing.
Hey, thank you guys for tuning in to Casual Conversations, the podcast with Dylan and Tony, where we turn deeper conversations into casual conversations, one episode at a time. Today's episode called Automation Nation, because I wasn't very creative with it, but I think it gets a point across, is being recorded on April 3rd? April 3rd. So yeah, these first few episodes of Casual Conversations, the podcast, is going to be about what are like big motivators for me and Dylan as people. And we just started with me because, you know, I'm egotistical and I write the show notes, so I can do whatever I want.
It's true. That's okay.
So this episode's gonna be... So in episode 0, I talked about the YouTube video Humans Need Not Apply being a very core 15-minute video to who I am as a person, and like what made me kind of what justified the way I think about things and overanalyze things and try to see things in different perspective and weigh the pros and cons of kind of everything a little too intensely. And it's kind of interesting just because I just double checked and that video came out in like 2012, if I remembered right. It came out like 5 years ago, and if it wasn't relevant then, it is all the more relevant now. There's like a few things in it that like could be updated, but honestly the video I over the last 5 years since it's been out, I've probably seen the video and it's in the 15-minute video in its entirety like upwards of 10 to 15 times. Every time I talk to people and have like intellectual conversations, it just comes up because it's such a core to who I am and what I believe. And I just watched it just now right before recording, and it's still completely relevant to me. That video is CGP Grey did an amazing job, and it is kind of perfect in every way for me, whether it's the presentation of the information, everything about it. It's just amazing. And I think part of that perfection is honestly how timeless it is. Although it's 5 years, and in certain terms 5 years is a long time, and in other terms 5 years isn't very long. And although some of the technologies he mentions in the video has been done much better and have been improved upon since the video has come out, honestly, like, that everything he says still applies today is at least how I view it. I've showed you the video and made you watch it with me a few times. Like, what do you think about it?
I kind of mentioned in like in our first episode 0, that automation was something that I hadn't really thought about before, and I think that it did kind of open my mind, even though I'm not necessarily like, well, I don't think the video takes like a super pro or anti-technology approach to either. It just takes automation and technology as kind of this inevitable force, which I think is very true. I mean, I come from, I guess, a lot more of my political background has been rooted in more like anti-technology, and so I think it was just kind of interesting and refreshing to see a different kind of idea about automation and the role that that's going to play and is playing today.
Yeah, so because because in my eyes the video's like borderline perfect in every way, I'm gonna try to touch on the subjects and kind of dive more into it. CGP Grey has talked about it in his own podcast in Hello Internet. He has dove a little bit more into a few subjects and touched on a few times. God, I'm gonna try very hard not to fanboy over him, but I just love that in one particular podcast when he talked about it, he talks about being very well aware that that might be the most influential thing he's ever going to do in his life, and he's perfectly okay with that. And like I love that as a character. Like yeah, and I just love that about him as a person, just like the way he views it. But he has gone more in depth a few times here and there and talked about specific like counter arguments on his podcast, and yeah, along those lines. But what I meant to bring this up for is this, because I think the video is so good, we're gonna try to talk about it in very general terms, and this episode isn't really about the video, it's about the idea of automation. So I'm gonna try to broaden it a bit. So yeah. So I think the first thing to talk about automation is the why it is prevalent, I guess. As much as I don't want to copy his YouTube video, it is like the most important place to start is why it is so inevitable and it is important to talk about. A lot of people do like to think of it as if it's the industrialized revolution, and it's very different. So Alice Gray refers it to as the robot revolution, and I am inclined to just agree with that, just for a different terminology, because having different names for things I think is very important. And I think to me at least, the key difference in the Industrial Revolution and the Robotic Revolution is that the Industrial Revolution made manual labor and made, like, I guess, quote unquote, hard work for people easier. But at the end of the day, it's still people doing the work. We're still the ones who need to back it and have it actually function. Whereas the robotic revolution is much more focused around general purpose AI, and whether it is self-learning AI or program writing AI, it's very much about AIs which have certain processes in learning or are made to be more effective at a specific thing than humans are. I think in the video, which I don't know why I haven't said this earlier, but you guys should really watch the video before this episode. He honestly presents it way more concisely, and I don't know, because I'm such a huge fan, I'm gonna say way better than I do, or I'm going to be able to. But for me, I'm just trying to further the conversation a bit. So yeah, in the episode, he makes a very good analogy about horses and car and about obsolescence. But I think the analogy that I'd rather use for the difference between the Industrial Revolution and Robotics Revolution is the idea of just doing math. Like, to start off, people would have to do really hard math by themselves. They'd have to write it out, think it out, and everything. And the Industrial Revolution would be like simple tools like the abacus, which most people don't know how to use, but because I'm Chinese, I actually was taught how to use the abacus. It's like one of those weird things. But if I started this analogy and I realized it doesn't make sense since most people don't know how to use it. But at the end of the day, like, it doesn't automatically do it for you, is my point. At the end of the day, you still need to learn how to use it. It is a tool. You learn how to use it, and then you have to figure out your problem and then use the abacus to help you solve it. And that's how a lot of like older machine robotics, like factory line robotics, particularly used in auto industry, a lot of computer manufacturing industry does that. A lot of manufacturing industry in general uses robotics in that sense, where it's still people doing the work, but you're using machinery to help you.
So it's kind of like the agricultural revolution would be how we can use our own bodies to create something. Industrial revolution would be like how to use our own bodies in addition to machinery. Then like the robotic revolution would be how do we program robots to act as the machines, and then eventually it would be, how do we program things to program things?
Yeah. So in the senses of like, I brought up the math thing because that the difference between the machinery used in Industrial Revolution and the robotics that are being implemented in the robotics revolution is the difference between an abacus and a calculator. A calculator doesn't require you to put thoughts like, yes, you need to know what buttons to push, but at the end of the day, if you push 12 times 12, you just have to hit the enter key and it'll give you the answer. The amount of human labor that's put into it is just putting in 12 times 12. Mm-hmm. And in the sense of like manufacturing something, it would just be you giving it the problem like, hey, I need a computer to be made. And it'll be able to search its own files and function and be like, oh, this is the manufacturing plans for the computer. You hit enter and then boom, computer's in front of you. And like that's like the analogy that I thought would be very, very relevant. And that's like a good way to look at it too from the stages. And because that's the last two that you brought up, whether it's humans telling robots what to do or robots programming other robots, both of them are, because of how technology improves as an exponential curve, those two stages are so close to each other that they might as well be the same one, mm-hmm. in my eyes at least. And it touches on another subject that's about equal in size that I'm going to try to stay clear of, and I might as well clarify it at this point. I really want to stay clear of AI in the form of super intelligence. It would be general purpose intelligence that is greater than the general purpose intelligence of a human being. Because that just complicates the subject, and it complicates the subject, I think, in a way that isn't necessary for at least this conversation. And I kind of want a completely separate episode about super intelligence anyways. So, and I do want to point, and because it is going to be two separate things, I want to point out the distinct differences to me as a person, which is, like, for example, calculators are a very specific form of super intelligence because calculators could do math that I can't in the blink of an eye. Like, you could ask it what's the 52nd exponent of 1238, and it'll give it to you in a fraction of a second. And for me to work that out, it would take forever.
Not very long if you have a calculator.
Exactly. So, as far as the terms of, like, this episode of Robotic Revolution, I want to stick around the terms of computers or robotics or programming that can do stuff in some situations better than humans, but in specific situations and not in a general intelligence sense. And it's a little bit harder to differentiate, but it makes the purpose of this episode a lot easier. And honestly, it'd be easier to clarify in an episode about superintelligence, about how superintelligence is different from regular programming anyways. I don't know, when watching the video, like, was there... You said, like, you hadn't thought of it in that perspective before. So as far as, like, the different tiers of jobs that could be and are being replaced, like, what did you find super surprising, or did you find any of it, like, super surprising, or was it more of just, like, the concept of it?
Yeah, I think mainly the concept of it. Like, I kind of knew... for the most part that, like, manufacturing jobs and stuff were moving towards this direction. It's one of those things that, like, I don't necessarily experience myself because I'm not a person who has ever done, like, that kind of job, so it doesn't, like, affect me, I guess. So it didn't surprise me. But I think generally the idea of automation making like even something like the arts obsolete in a way, or yeah, different things like that, like doing jobs that aren't necessarily like physical jobs but like mental jobs, or creative jobs, is, I guess that part was pretty wild to me.
Yeah, and I actually think that's like the coolest part of it. Like some of the coolest part of AI. I love programs, writing programs, and it's like meta and it's cool, but I really want to find a new term for it because was it you that I was talking about it the other week with? I don't remember, but yes, it was. But when we were talking about the idea of like artificial being just another word to specifically describe what humans made, in my eyes, like as far as the progression of time, like everything is natural in the sense of if it happened, then it was supposed to happen. So even stuff made by humans are natural in that sense. But that's kind of the way I look at it. Like I know that's kind of the way I personally look at it. And in a more general sense, people think like, oh, things made from nature is natural, and things that humans have intervened in, touched upon, or like created would be called artificial. And I'm leaning more and more towards the idea that we need to have a separate word for things that are made from artificial intelligence, like a second degree of separation between that and nature, in the sense of coming from the earth. And it's wild, like machine learning and stuff like that. It's just amazing on a smaller scale of creativity, and I kind of don't understand why that's been the measurement of how smart things are for so long, which is like playing games where even in the video they brought up when they bested us in chess. And by recently I mean within the past like year or half a year or so, someone just wrote a computer program that beat the grandmaster of Go, which most people don't know how to play Go, but it's one of those games that embodies the idea of simple to learn, hard to master. And just the amount of possibilities of things that could happen in that game is numerically humongous. So they really needed to write a program that actually like learns the ideas and patterns of the game, much more than just, okay, these are all the possible outcomes, which outcomes give me a higher percentage of winning. And they really had to like rethink how to write the program for it. But as far as like creativity and art goes, I think art is so subjective that a lot of cool things come out of it. Like Google Dreams, like you've seen pictures.
Oh
from
yeah,
that, right?
yeah.
Like, I would agree that's art.
Yeah.
In my eyes, you can't not define that as art, and to me, like, technology and art together has had such like a weird kind of merging in just my personal experience. One of the favorite pieces I've ever made. Have I told you about this? I don't know if I have. I did art since I was kind of little, and I've played music when I was younger and stuff too. But anyways, one of the pieces I'm proudest of was just some random glitch, and I still have no idea how it happened or what happened. But in high school, this is a bit of a story and a bit of a tangent, but in high school, one year our seniors got really rowdy and pushed over an entire locker bay. And obviously, like, eventually we sectioned it off of yellow tape, and the school didn't want it getting out, so they were like blocking people from it and not letting people pass. And I like very sneakily took a picture because I thought it was like cool, and I just wanted to send it to people and be like, look, we tipped over a locker bay. And so it was just like a random picture of some locker bays tipped over. And when I plugged in my phone to charge it later that night, I have no idea what happened at all, and I wasn't prompted for anything or anything. Yeah, I don't know. But anyways, point is, I woke up in the morning and it printed a copy of that picture, but in only blue hues, and like it's very scratchy and looks kind of ridiculous. And I like really liked the way it looked, and I guess nowadays we'd say like it looked like there was some really unique filter on that was put onto a picture. And I really liked how it looked, and I then like re-outlined and redrew what happened in pencil. And it is probably one of my favorite, I guess, quote unquote art pieces I've ever made. And I don't know what happened after I plugged in my phone and what made it print that way. And because that's like the most proud thing I've ever had, like it's very easy for me to say that technology is capable of art. As far as music writing goes, in the video he talked about the musical composer. I think her name's Emily Howard or something. I forget what it is. So. Yeah, but people have gotten way more ambitious with that too, since that video is now 5 years old. People are starting to write this program which is supposed to be able to mash up music genres. So you input like 2 or 3 music genres, and then it'll take themes and ideas of how it's made and then mash them together and compose a song with this new mashed up genre.
Yeah.
And I think that's like crazy and cool, but like I feel like it's very easy for people to get creeped out by androids and artificial intelligence, whether it is subpar to humans or equal or above to humans. I think people are just creeped out by it, and I guess it's because of the medias I consume. I think we need to just learn to integrate, and I don't know. I think it's just I'm so tech focused that I'm like, well, we just need to learn to integrate and get along with it. But what do you think about it?
I think it's obviously pretty complicated. It depends like on the intention of the technology for me, or even like how it's made can be, I don't know. Like it can be pretty destructive, you know. If it is, obviously, I'm not okay with that. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, I'm not really sure. Like I'm not necessarily. I wouldn't consider myself pro technology in any way, but like I mentioned before, I think that this video kind of had put it in a way that makes it sound more like it's inevitable, which it essentially is. Like as one person, I'm not gonna take down all of technology or something, you know?
Yeah.
But I don't know, I guess I see it more like that. Like it's kind of this inevitable force. And that being said, I think that we should be cautious about it even still. Like just because it's inevitable doesn't mean we shouldn't, you know, like just critique it and at any point. And I'm just all about that, like in every aspect of everything, like just really thinking for ourselves and thinking about it, not necessarily just accepting it because, well, somebody made it and it's just the way the world is now. So
I think to that point, that's another separation of issues of which episode it should be in. And something that I want to bring up is in this episode, I want to talk a lot more about the idea, like remove the idea of intentions of machines out of it, because that steps into the boundaries of general purpose superintelligence. And I want to remove the intentions and dangers of that out of it, and I want to focus much more of the dangers of society and how even benign artificial intelligence can affect society heavily. But with that question, I wanted to specify a little bit more into like with the type of music you use a lot of, I guess, like I would consider pedals and stuff like that, machine assistance. Where would be the defining line for you of like, I mean, it'd be a blurry line to begin with, but where would be the defining line for you when it's like you making the music and the pedals helping you create the sounds you want, to when, you know, say, I know one of the pedals you were telling me about last week is like a sound randomizer, and at that point, would you consider that like the pedals or the machines doing more than you are to produce your music?
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely. I'm not entirely resistant to the idea that, you know, kind of going back to the idea of creativity and automation with creativity. I think there's a lot of people maybe who are cautious about calling, you know, something like that piano composition that a program made, calling that music. But I guess I'm not really like that. Like, I still consider it music. I don't necessarily think that like music is 100% or art even is 100% about the intentions or who even made it, but rather about our interpretations of it. Like, I mean, to take that even farther, like, this sounds really silly, but one of the coolest pieces of art I've ever seen was literally just like this massive panel of sheet metal that had been rusted, and like I thought that was just so cool how like the rain had just created this weird pattern on it. And that's obviously like, you know, I don't personally think nature was like, I'm trying to make an art piece right now. It just happened, but I came along and I was like, that is art. And so I think the same goes for music, where I rely heavily on a lot of things that kind of create or manipulate the sounds that I'm putting into them. Like Tony mentioned with guitar pedals, a lot of pedals out there can really turn your guitar into like a really alien sounding instrument, make it totally noisy, whatever it may be. And I think that's definitely just part of the art. Like, that's, to me, that's really no different than utilizing different paintbrushes or something like that when you're painting. You know, it's just utilizing tools to help you create a sound that maybe you're trying to go for. Like that one pedal that you mentioned, it kind of is random, but in a sense, like when I would use that, I'm going for like a certain sound, maybe not like exactly the same as what comes out of it, but something similar, and I think that's important there.
Yeah, and I guess to me that's where like it's these like in between points and kind of interactions that's kind of the coolest, because they provide the most room for growth. Like, it's when we, as whether individuals or as humanity, like really have to get our stuff together and like figure it out. And I think that's why art of like these specific periods is very cool. Like when you talked about the sheet metal being rusted, like that in a lot of ways could be, in my eyes, kind of like an art piece that's an interaction of the natural, quote unquote, natural world and artificial, because sheet metal is very much human made. And like your type of music or the random thing of kind of picture that I made would be kind of in between of what's artificial and what's Artificial.
Artificial? Sounds kind of nice.
Yeah.
Compared to artificial.
Yeah. Artificial. Okay. So from this point forward, we're gonna start using the word artificial for stuff made from automata or machines.
And no, it's not like Otto from Rocket Power.
OTTO official.
We're gonna just start off and clarify that.
But so the art pieces that are in between artificial and artificial, and I think those are very pretty still, and depending on how you view and critique art, I think we already see a lot of that in our everyday life.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I think people are just resistant to that because I don't know, the problem with like the definition of art is like it is ambiguous, but kind of for a reason, and it's been like the subject of so many debates just because of that. And I think people really grasp onto this idea that art needs to be created by humans, and I've never agreed with that aside from like automation and stuff. I've just thought that natural things can be art. Like, why is it that when we take a photo of something, it suddenly becomes art, but just viewing that is not art? Like, if I go out and just look at the mountains, like, and told my friends, yeah, I looked at this great art piece, they'd look at me like I was an idiot. But if I took a picture of it, it becomes art. So that's something that I think is kind of absurd. And I think the same thing can be said here with automation, where it's kind of silly to think that, and really kind of egotistical on humans' part to think that we're the only ones who can create art and the only ones who can be creative.
Yeah, definitely. The idea that humans are kind of the best that we're ever gonna be, I think, is far too egotistical. Just because we're apex predators on this planet we currently live on, we feel like we are. Just because like the only things that we're like, oh, that's creative, or like it's making art, it's like elephant paintings, which is very much akin to a 3-year-old like painting your walls with a marker, like. And because we're so used to just like that difference in levels of intelligence, and certainly there are animals who can do stuff better than humans, but not in a general intelligence sense, or in just an intelligence sense in general, which sounds like the same thing but is slightly different. Think about it. Yeah, I think that's honestly where it derives from, and it's that kind of thinking that we need to start straying away from, or else we're gonna. I feel, it's funny because sometimes I feel like we're in the world that's depicted so long ago. Have you ever heard of the fan theory of the Jetsons and the Flintstones being the same universe?
Yeah.
Like, I feel that way so much with environmental issues sometimes. So for people who haven't heard of the fan theory, it's a long-standing fan theory that the Jetsons and the Flintstones exist within the same universe. So the fan theory goes that somewhere along the lines of the future, there's a sect of people who did not believe in robots intervening in our everyday life and wanted to kind of return to nature and rely on kind of animals as companions. And those people stayed on the ground and became the Flintstones, who, you know, through companions of like quote-unquote natural animals, essentially became cavemen and lived in prehistoric age, and they have their own political views on how humanity should be structured. And the people who believed in living alongside robots, people like me, decide to build their own cities and ascend into the skies and became the Jetsons.
I feel like I'm kind of more of a Flintstone.
Do you?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely do.
Oh man, we're gonna live in different worlds.
That's alright.
You're gonna be bowling and swing your arms hoping to knock pins down, and I'm gonna be hitting buttons on a microwave and it 3D printing food for me.
I mean, some of the Flintstones tools are pretty absurd. Like why they have wheeled things, but they still power it with their feet is pretty ridiculous to me.
Foot powered cars.
I would probably change a couple things in that society, but I'd still probably join them over the Jetsons.
What?
I like Earth too much.
That's sad. No, that's sad that like we're on different ends of this. If this happens, I'm just gonna be living in the sky, and every once in a while I'll come down to visit you, and I'll be like an alien sentient being.
Yeah. I'll just grunt at you.
Yeah. Oh god.
Call you like sky gods or something.
Because I believe in alternate universes. That's a thing. Because we thought it's a thing that happened. Oh god. But but back to the actual topic. As like, because I do think robotics creativity is very, very interesting, but that does steer a little bit into super intelligence. I want to focus more on the impact on people's jobs for this episode. So before they talk about creative jobs being replaced by robots, they talk about the stuff that's more understandable, where it's low skill job, like a lot of manual labor and transportation. And transportation as a job, as an industry, is just something that is always like so kind of funny to me, and that people don't think about it. But transportation is the largest industry in the US and maybe the world, probably the world, because everything needs to be transported, from natural goods to factories to made goods to storage warehouses, from storage warehouses to where things are sold to the consumer. Like, all of that includes several stages of transportation. And it's something that most people who don't work transportation jobs don't think about. But if you really think about it, it makes sense that it's the largest industry. And that is probably one of the first industry that we're going to see a huge replacement by automation over human forces. The self-driving cars have been way further tested than talked about in the video. They are functionally on highways, in particular areas a lot more than some other ones, but they have been functional and they are being used now. And with technology, it's not always about having the technology or not, it's about the adaptation and being able to make it cost efficient for everyday people. And that is happening more and more with automated vehicles, because all the companies are trying to get in on it, so there's a huge market of competition. And honestly, it's something that is just fairly inevitable to us. On a more immediate kind of effect of that is, if you look at the company Uber, the owner and creator of Uber have talked about many times that he kind of doesn't want people to drive for Uber. He wants Uber to be made as an app, and once it's functioning, he essentially wants to replace the entire human workforces with automated vehicles, so Uber wouldn't have a driver. And besides taking out all of the Uber drivers out of a job, that also takes out, if that happens, and the idea is like if and when, because it's kind of inevitable, whether it is Uber doing this or anyone else, that has some kind of wild implications. at least like in my head, that's essentially crowdsourcing a car. If you don't have to pay the driver for Uber, and Uber's function cost is basically paying for the car itself and the maintenance cost of the car and the gas of the car, it would be way cheaper to order an Uber ride than to own a car. And when we get to that point, it's kind of like crowd sharing a car in that sense. It's just everybody who's part of that app in that community would all partially share in the car. Yes, they don't own it, but they all use. Do you get what I mean? Because the idea is you're not driving anyways, and instead of owning your own automated car and having to maintain it yourself and pay for insurance yourself, it would make more sense for like the two of us to just order it back and forth because it's automated anyways. And the idea would be like 100,000 people owning, I don't know, like 50,000 cars, and that cost would be cut in half, you know? And I think that idea is super cool, and kind of got tangented again.
That's okay.
Welcome to Casual Tangents, the podcast.
Did you expect anything less from us?
That's what you get for not having very in-depth show notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the workforce, so from the very, I guess, low-skill workforce between cashiers, even stuff that I do, like salesperson, like all of those are kind of low skills as far as automation goes. Like that stuff should come very clearly and easily to if you step up to like programming and white collar jobs. Like I said, there are programs that write programs, and it's elite. I was driving over and I was thinking about this point, and I expanded it a lot, and I don't want it to be that big of a topic, but the idea of programs, writing programs, is really cool, and it's the idea that I expanded it into is the idea that humanity is so successful because we built off of our predecessors. Like, we don't have to re-find out everything our parents or our ancestors have found out. That stuff's in books, and we just need to read it, and we understand it to be a truth. Part of the success of us is we can build upon, and within our lifetime, we further the studies instead of just relearning the same thing that our predecessors have learned. And machine learning is one of those things that falls in that category for me. If you talk about any scientific idea that's well developed now, at some point, if you go far enough in the past, like, it's non-existent. Like, someone had to pioneer that idea. And nowadays, most basic ideas of chemistry, physics, any sect of science is touched upon during primary school for us now. So it allows us to further it a lot more. And where machine learning fits into this is how accessible it is. I so often refer YouTubers, but a YouTuber that I used to watch who's just a regular gamer, I don't know if he has a background in programming or not, but a while back he made a series where he was teaching his program, like a program that he wrote to play video games. And it's simple, like the way he does it. And that's like the cool thing about machine learning is it doesn't need to be complicated, because even if it's less effective than how humans learn, you can just increase the processes and increase the rate that it's using things, and that's how it learns. So it's the idea of using algorithms to learn in a less kind of functional way. It's kind of like hard forcing your way through a problem. Instead of thinking of, oh, what's 2 times 3, you're thinking of what's 2 plus 2 plus 2. It's kind of how his program works. Without going super in depth into it, basically he programs the programs to hit buttons and see what happens. And he then gives that a rating to if it finishes the level or not. And the machine is gonna try to hit the next button and see if that progresses it further. And then the next button pattern. And from there, it creates patterns of, okay, if I hit the right button, it moves me to the right, which increases my percentage progress to finishing the level. And it runs iterations of that millions and millions of time until it finally learns how the control scheme works and what progresses it further or not. And then at the end, he adds on another program which rates its success rating on how fast it finished the level. So then it tries to do the program tries to do everything it's learned to finish the level in faster and faster times. Is like the most basic way to explain it, I guess. I'm tangenting so far. I'm like tangenting into super intelligence like so quickly, but it's okay. A super intelligence, I can expand any any minor section of idea of super intelligence into a full episode, so we can eat super intelligence time as much as we want. Maybe we should have done the super intelligence episode first. But it doesn't make sense because that's further in the future than automation is.
Is it? Probably.
It depends. If super intelligence is as fast as some people estimate, then super intelligence and automation happens essentially simultaneously. That's another topic for another day. Okay. Let's bring it back. So, I want to talk a little bit about how you said that in the video they very much gave the feel that a robot revolution is inevitable. Were there like specific parts that helped drive that home, that idea home, or that feeling home?
Well, I guess that video got me thinking about how, especially like within a capitalist worldview, like, and society, automation like makes sense, you know, and it's not something I'm advocating for here necessarily, capitalism and stuff, but yeah, like if you can do something more efficiently and cheaper, you will. Like, as somebody who is, let's just call them a capitalist, like if you're somebody who owns a business or something, those are like top priorities for every organization, you know? It's like
cost benefit analysis.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess that's where I felt like it was inevitable. Like, I'm personally like not somebody who's pro-capitalist or anything, but I don't really see it going away anytime soon. I would like it to, but I don't see it going away anytime soon. And I think automation is just an extension of that. And not necessarily that, but I think like just the human, I guess civilization's desire to kind of push the line a little bit further with that, with like what we can do. And I think automation kind of steps into that a little bit. Like, it can do more than us in a lot of ways. So, which also kind of ventures more into the next topic, but still, yeah, I think we kind of have that desire to see what more we can do, and the video kind of only briefly goes into some of that, but I think that just sort of drove it home for me.
Yeah, and he does, a lot of people, I mean, it is a widely viewed video, particularly because of the I was like, my voice is getting scratchy because I have phlegm. And I could feel it and hear it. But particularly because of the people viewing the video are mostly very critical thinkers, there has been a lot of replies and rebuttals and kind of discussion over it. Even 5 years later, like, I still want to talk about this video. And, like, since I watched the video the day it came out, and I can easily say I haven't gone a year without talking about the video with someone new. And if not, like, it'd be closer to, like, several times a year. It randomly pop up, I'd watch it again, and I'd bring it up, and I'd talk about it with someone. Like I said, I've seen it, like, 10 to 15 times. Over 5 years, that's, like, 3 times a year. I love that video. And so Gray has come out and talked about several rebuttals and several points before, and I do think they're very important to point out, especially on a societal sense. Even in the video, he talks briefly about how people think the unions won't allow it. Let's be real, unions lose every time. Next subject. A lot of people think, like, oh, that's not how capitalism works, the invisible hand will force it. Like, as people, we just don't participate in it. For example, if you know this t-shirt was made by automation, made by robots, it is a artificial t-shirt as opposed to a artificial t-shirt. Dude, I like the word, but I'm also going to be very aware that with my accent, it's very hard to tell it apart.
Yeah.
But anyways, it's that idea that people are like, oh, well, just don't participate in it. But again, look at history. That's not how things work.
Well, that's not even necessarily how capitalism works. Like, we don't really control the market like capitalists want to tell you that you do, but it's never in our control. It's always the ones running the show. And that's why I mentioned the whole thing about people at the top would love automation.
Oh yeah,
That's why it would kind of happen with...
You pay the upfront cost of machinery, and then you pay for electricity, and you're done.
Yeah. And maybe maintenance, but...
Yeah. Yeah, but I wanted to drive home the idea, like, the economic side of, like, that's not how things work. If you look at it, like, people feel that way about child labor laws. They're like, oh, if you see something made in China, don't buy it. But at the end of the day, most of our stuff's still made in China. And for me, what it comes down to is it's like almost an elitist mentality. Like, that mentality isn't elitist in itself, but it comes from a place of privilege. Because if things cost less to make, then they're able to sell it for less and still profit. So to the masses who aren't privileged enough to have a choice of, hey, should I buy this t-shirt from H&M for $5? Or should I buy this t-shirt from, oh my god, I can't think of a mass manufacturing clothing company that's based in the US right now. Because I'm pretty sure American Apparel isn't.
I doubt it.
I actually can't think of one right now. But this fictional company that I can't think of that's like made in the USA and like made with fair business practice. And that t-shirt's gonna run you $20. But it's the same white t-shirt between H&M and that one. While me, I do this as well. As someone who comes from privilege, like, yeah, you can be like, hey, I'm against those unfair labor laws. I'm going to vote with my dollar and pay for the $20 t-shirt instead of the $5 one. But that's why that comes from a place of privilege. The majority of people can't afford to do that. Or even if they can afford to, it's not a smart choice for them to.
It's like the whole thing with organic food. Or people who shop at Walmart, the elitism about both of those things where people are like, oh, if more people just bought organic food, or if people just stopped shopping at Walmart, it's like, obviously you have more money because you're able to make those choices. But there's a whole lot of people who are, poor and can't make those choices.
Don't forget the forgotten people.
Yeah. You can get a Make America Great Again hat. It's all American made. It's not
all website.
It's from China.
Yeah, so like that's one of the points that I want to drive home, because a lot of people, I guess, don't think about that enough, is the idea that choice is a privilege, especially choice in where to buy stuff, how much to pay for stuff is very much a privilege. Another idea I want to drive home is the idea that people are like, even if that did work, even if you can pay by your dollar, like vote with your dollar and buy things that are made by people and not robots, it does nothing except to hold ourselves back, I feel. In the sense that, let's say the USA made labor laws that banned all machines, like automated work like that. Just banned automated manufacturing of t-shirts, which we're just going to keep running with this now. Other countries aren't going to. Again, like, think child labor laws. If US isn't happy to make super, super cheap t-shirts pretty much free of human labor, do you think China would be opposed to that? I'm here to tell you that China would love the idea of just robots making everything, and you don't even need to pay the several dollars you pay the kids every month to make t-shirts, So if you buy into the idea of like, oh, our manufacturing industry is hurt by other countries, whether whatever other country that has very cheap manufacturing, if you buy into that idea, then you cannot also buy into the idea that we can stop automation, because those countries will be more than happy to use it. And that's going to drive the divide of made in USA things. That same $5 t-shirt at H&M, which is $20 at this fictional company, and then at Automata Co., like, they could sell it for 20 cents.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to be able to fight those prices. And the idea of made in America or made in China or made by robots as like a little tag on a t-shirt, like, that's not gonna happen. And I think that like kind of drives in the inevitability of it for me.
The only thing, I guess, I don't want to like deviate too much from what you have, but the only thing about it is that we're kind of operating under the assumption that because it costs them less to make, they would charge less. But I don't necessarily think that's true. I think capitalists, prove time and time again, like, more often than not, those people are going to take more of the profits, because that's...
Oh, as far as percentage profit-wise, it's going to go up, but I think the prices would actually go down. Like, maybe it wouldn't be down to, like, 20 cents.
Yeah.
But it'd definitely be, like, from $5 to, like, $3.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I wouldn't put all my... I don't know. I wouldn't bet on that one, though. Personally, I guess.
Yeah. I think they would increase the percent margin that they're going to be making, the, like, profit margin that they'll be making. But, like, I think it would still be cheaper just because that's how you compete, and that's kind of, like, the easier way of making money.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess the competition with, like, non-automation production companies or something, yeah, they probably would want to go lower just to compete with them, but as soon as like everything is automation, I feel like they would just take more of the cut.
Oh yeah.
And it wouldn't be as cheap as, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but I think that's something to really consider too.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think, like, it's kind of funny because we've been using manufacturing the whole time, but I also think manufacturing is kind of a moot point because 3D printing is getting cheaper and cheaper. Not to deviate, but I recently saw a kind of DIY 3D printer kit. Basically, it sends you all the parts and you put it together, and it's supposed to cut a lot of the costs, and it's really affordable, and I kind of want one. And because of how 3D printer is very much like user driven right now, that's how the machine was made, like meant to be. It's supposed to be like a DIY 3D printing machine. People have already uploaded blueprints for improvements to the part that you get. So you can just buy the super cheap 3D printing kit. By super cheap, I mean relatively cheap. And it's like under 1,000. I'm thinking it's somewhere between like 300 to 600. I forget.
Wow.
So, and people buy this kit and then load it up with the plastic and then print better parts for it and replace the parts themselves. And from what I've seen or heard, like, it prints just as well. But that's 3D printing is like another technological thing that just astounds me, and I could talk about it for a long time as well. But yeah, I think it's just kind of funny that we use manufacturing as an example when in reality manufacturing is like there's a whole nother direction that manufacturing could be moving towards.
Yeah. Well, I did see like a video about them 3D printing a whole house. Have you seen that?
No.
It was pretty wild. They just loaded it up with like concrete and then just 3D printed it, and then they had people go back in and like just install things that the machine couldn't do, like windows, but it ends up being really cheap and ends up being like pretty structurally sound and stuff.
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't see how they couldn't do it.
Yeah.
They're doing more difficult stuff with it, like 3D. They're trying to 3D print organs and stuff, which, like I said, it's another topic for another day. But yeah, so being that it's gonna come, I think a very important part is to think about the impacts economically to humans. In the video, they talk about how the Great Depression's unemployment rate were at like 25%, and right now the current top 30 jobs that people have jobs in. I wish I could phrase that better, but I can't. So, the top 30% that people have jobs in are all pretty automatable. And if you were to automate those like 30 jobs, those 30 jobs and those 30 jobs alone would put unemployment rates to 45%. And they talk a little bit more about how we need to, and this is one of those core things that really changed me as a person about that video. Was up to that point, up to the point when I saw the video, I was a big believer of like the invisible hand, and I very much bought into capitalistic values. And it was kind of like after this video, I realized that capitalism cannot work anymore under the idea that this is inevitable. Like, automation and capitalism cannot both coexist in the same world. It honestly like radically changed, like I said, because this video, I feel like this video just like started an intellectual growth spur for me. Because I started thinking of things more critically, I then viewed like unemployment very differently as well. Like, because my ideas of capitalistic societies change, it instantly chain reaction for me to think about unemployment differently. Up to that point, I was always like the very typical person, very not sympathetic towards people who are unemployed. And in some ways, I'm still not. But because the video, I realized that I have to very much change my idea of employment and employability. Besides, on like a cultural and societal level, I understood it, and I've been trying to get better about viewing things differently because of, like, this is my belief of things to come. So, like, I need to start adjusting before I get hit with the culture shock of the future, you know? Future. Hashtag future shocked. Oh, God.
No.
But a big part of that impacted me on a personal level, too. Like, I think that's a big part of why I have such, like, job dissatisfaction and such a hard time finding jobs that I'm happy in. Besides a lot of mixed things of, like, being passionate about jobs, being paid enough about jobs, I am constantly thinking about, how early in the process of automation is this job going to be replaced? And how much am I willing to rely on this job as a career path for myself when, in my view, the end of the line is robots are going to take it over? And it's a question I have that I still have just never come close to an answer yet. Like, I haven't thought of anything that I can do that a robot cannot. This and the fourth kind of big topic that I wrote down in the show notes kind of makes this pretty well, being possible solutions for unemployment people. Unemployable people.
Unemployment people.
I just made the biggest, like, WTF face, like, of, like, what just came out of my mouth? You know what? English isn't my first language, so I'm gonna blame it on that. But yeah, it's possible solutions for unemployable people. And it reels in the phrase that you brought up. What was the story behind it? Why did we randomly come up with that phrase? Do you remember?
Oh, the reform one?
Yeah.
Let's see, we were talking about... we're talking about, like, how the systems that are put in place have checks and balances for a reason and aren't interested, for the most part, in large-scale reform. So what I brought up was, and it's kind of paraphrasing this JFK quote that I'm going to probably butcher, sort of, but which is, when you make nonviolence impossible, you make violence inevitable. And after thinking about that, I was thinking about how, people really are interested in kind of, especially after this election, we saw people like Bernie Sanders and even Trump to an extent talking about kind of reform of this system, which, at least as far as what Bernie Sanders was talking about, I really don't think this system had any interest in the extent to which he wants to reform things. Maybe little bits and pieces, but this brought me to the quote, when you make reform impossible, you make revolution inevitable, which I think is just true. Like, a mass amount of people want something different. They might try to go through the system for a while and be like, please let us have gerbs or whatever, let us, have food. But if that system is like, no, we're interested in other things, and if they do that long enough, people are obviously going to get mad and have a revolution, in a way. Hopefully, you would hope. There are a lot of countries where they haven't necessarily hit that breaking point yet, but I think it's there somewhere.
Yeah, like, the breaking point definitely does exist.
It's a tangent in itself, but...
Hey, it was great. It was exactly what I wanted, so... Okay. Yeah, it's funny because this is, like, I feel like this is slowly, like this podcast is slowly moving towards like becoming more and more of like our real conversations. So it's like slowly, I was gonna say it's slowly getting darker and darker, but like I realized like, dude, we've compared Trump to Hitler for like 2 episodes already. Like, is it really? Are we getting darker at this point? And then it's like we're overanalyzing, chilling Black Mirror. Like, are we getting darker or is this whatever? It's besides the point. But that's it. And like part of my brain instantly thought of, I'm like, yeah, we need to make that episode about the ideas of being negative enough to bring positivity out of it in our personal usage, and that's how we are as people.
Yeah.
That should be a thing that happens soon. I have not gonna tangent about how many different like episode ideas that I'm in love with, and I just like can't wait to get to.
Yeah.
Because that is like a list and a half. But yeah, so the quote that Dylan made up, which like I absolutely love, is yeah, when you make reform impossible, you make revolution inevitable. And that revolution, when we created it, was much more about the political systems in place, whether it's the voting system being broken or stuff along those lines. But in this situation, we're talking about much more of capitalistic ideals. Because in my views, like, capitalism cannot exist in the way it does now with automation coming. Because with 45, 50, however many percent of people unemployed, we're going to hit a breaking point where, yeah, we're mass manufacturing whatever we wanted. Like, we're going to keep using t-shirts for the example. Yeah, we're mass manufacturing t-shirt, but we're not hiring people, and people aren't being paid, so no one's buying the t-shirt. So what's really going on with the economy at that point? And I don't know if there's any historic precedents that we can draw on for this. So if there is any, like, let us know. Do you know of any? Yeah. So, if there's any historical precedents that you could think of that would be somewhat comparable, like, definitely let us know. But honestly, I can't think of any. And the closest thing that always comes to mind when a population's getting poorer and poorer and the rich is getting richer and richer is the French Revolution. When people can't sustain a way of life that they're used to anymore, because they are now unemployable and they don't have money, like, that's kind of what happens. Is either we need to make massive reforms to figure out, okay, are we going to be some form of socialism where we just kind of have a base amount of money that we hand out to people, like a living stipend for being a human being, and that's what drives our economical force, which, like, I wouldn't get how that would work, honestly.
Like, maybe like what we were saying earlier about the capitalists kind of having more money to themselves, I guess. Like, if there were a way to reform a system where they had to distribute some of that money to the people who, yeah, I guess that would be the only way that would make sense to me. Because otherwise, like, if 50% of the people are unemployed, that means 50% are obviously employed. So, like, that's half of the people having to support the other half, and I don't think people would put up with that either.
Yeah.
I think people care about each other to an extent, but also apparently not. So
well, that's the problem. Is like, yes, the other 50%'s employed, but I don't think that the financial disparity is gonna get any smaller. A while back, I drew up this statistic that, what, like 10, 15 years ago? Oh no, I hate forgetting statistics that, like, I believe in and are crucial. But basically, over time, it's the measurement of how many people own 50% of the world's wealth. And I think, like, point is, it's only gotten smaller and smaller. And the most recent one done, I think, was a few years back, if not, like, a year back. And I think it was, like, top 5 richest people hold more money than 50% of the population, something along those lines. And, like, that's not gonna get any better with automation. If anything, it's gonna get worse.
Yeah.
So, like, in my eyes, that's the definition of socialism, is, like, taking money from the top percentages and redividing it amongst the populace.
Yeah.
I'm like, am I wrong in that, or is there more to it that I'm missing out on? That as like a very general concept of it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I could see even outside of, I guess it would be more of a completely different shift in society, but like something that would be more like a communist co-ownership of a business, like all these people own it rather than one person who's making all the money from the automation. It would be like a whole city or something like that is making money off of it.
That's actually like really akin to the like kind of Uber plan that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, that it would either be that or the like capitalist having to distribute that wealth. I think those two options are the only way it would really work, and with people being satisfied. But I also don't necessarily see the one of like the capitalist distributing the wealth actually happening at all. Like I mean, you'd have to have like a government that would really...
It'd require government interaction.
Yeah, and I mean, at that point, obviously, like with even the system that we live in now, like the capitalists are so like entwined with the politicians in so many ways that it's not at all in their interest to reform. And that's kind of where I was coming back to like the whole idea of making reform impossible. Like they have no interest in changing or like distributing that wealth because a lot of them benefit from that. And I think this idea of automation only exacerbates that.
Yeah, just a really quick like half step back. I think one of the funnest way to think about it is the Alaskan Permanent Fund. Have you heard about that?
No.
Yeah, but basically the idea is the Alaskan government, when they found oil and to allow people to drill oil there, what they essentially... This is like a very generalized overview of the actual article that it's a part of. By article, I mean article of law, not like a newspaper article. But basically, when they found oil, they said that all the residents of Alaska had a claim to it because they lived on the land.
Yeah.
So they allow oil company to drill, but the oil company they have to pay for the oil because they're taking it from the people. And I talked about automation. One of the many people I've talked about it with, we talked about applying that idea to a bigger theme of things. Like, for example, if we're automatically making t-shirts, then the fibers have to come out of the earth, like the nutrients come out of the earth. And since we as human beings, like, quote unquote, own those materials, then companies would have to pay to use any materials, and that's like a good way of distributing the wealth, but just for like every aspect of things are being used. And I think that's kind of an interesting idea.
Yeah.
To try to like appease people, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only option I really think makes sense.
Yeah, and like it's funny because we keep talking about all these government interactions, and like I said, besides in one of the many ways this changed me, this video and this idea changed me, is up until that point, like I said, I very much believed in capitalism, and if anything else, I was like pretty conservative, like in my views. Of course, that was 5 years ago, so I was like 2019, something around that. Like, I always thought my views were pretty conservative, and the idea that like, oh, government should just stay out of business and things should be all right. And then like after 15 minutes, I'm like, no, I was completely wrong. I'm so sorry. But yeah, and the second part of that I think is very important of the quote that you made, which is like, you make a revolution inevitable. And I can't imagine how a French Revolution would look with the weapons we have nowadays between those social and like financial elites of the world and the poor people.
Yeah.
Like, I get the idea of like, oh, hurrah, like we have guns, like whatever, but like if they're rich enough, they could just buy missiles, and I don't think that's a fight that could be won.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, I guess one of the important things there too is like, take for instance like standoffs that happen between coal miners and coal companies. Like, yeah, they could send in scabs to do the work, but ultimately they depend on somebody doing that job. But in this case, like, you couldn't have a strike or something.
The somebody is all robots.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, they honestly don't need you. So it's kind of tough. I think there's a lot of things that we're going to have to face that we can't even conceptualize right now.
But I think a very important part to think about is the timeline of all of this. Most of the time, there's like a very early release and show of things, and that's like a ways away. But when you hear about things as much as we do, then that means it's pretty close to being on the market. And once it's on the market, it takes like maybe like 5-10 years tops to fully utilize it and integrate it into our society. And so I don't know how far the professionals look at the timeline nowadays. And it's always hard with technology because it is exponential growth. Like, timelines are getting closer and closer and faster. The time between conceptualizing technology to it being like widely used by the general populace has only gotten faster with every technology we've made. So it's very hard to conceptualize, but I wouldn't put it past like 10 years to when there are at least enough jobs being automatized that it is an issue. And I don't think our systems are in place to try to handle this entire revolution within the next 10 years, especially with number 45 as our president for the next 4 years. That timeline I feel kind of pressured and rushed for this timeline.
Well, I mean, I guess it's kind of tangent-y, but it kind of reminded me of something that you had talked to me about before, and kind of how 45 in some ways is going to expedite some of these processes and make it more of a rough transition. And one of the things I remember you bringing up was maybe an interview or some time in which Steve Jobs and Obama had talked about bringing Apple jobs back to America.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and good old Trump is trying to bring Apple jobs back, or says he is. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. But yeah, the interview I referenced, essentially Steve Jobs told Obama like those jobs are never coming back. Like, that's not possible. And I still believe that. I'm not his biggest fan, but I still believe that to be true. Like, the idea that America could step back into a role of like a very prominent figure in manufacturing, I think that idea is long gone.
Yeah, the quote-unquote good old days are gone, and
what good old days?
Yeah.
Like, who wants to work manufacturing jobs anyways? Like, trust me, those children all around the world do not want to work those jobs, and neither do we.
Yeah, there's a reason they put them in other countries. Well, partly because it's cheaper. Mostly because it's cheaper.
Almost completely
Entirely.
because it's cheaper.
Yeah. And they have less regulations, which I guess is because, well, I guess is also why it's cheaper. But.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm kind of under the idea of either reform or revolution, and it's kind of like, for me, because the timeline's so pressured, and like I've been thinking this way for the past 5 years. Like, I've thought the timeline's very pressured. Of course, then being closer to the views of like 15 to 20 years, and now closer to like 5-10 years. I feel more and more pressured by it as I grow older, and the idea of trying to develop a career is more and more important. The closer I get, which Trump just took off 4 years from me, because I don't believe Trump's going to do anything for automation or reforms for people to prepare us for automations, is the more correct thing to say. The timeline just got cut like another 4 years. And although I don't believe we can have a modern revolution in America because the military prowess is just too despairing between the financial elites and the haves and have-nots. Like, I'm leaning towards I think that revolution is a lot higher of a probable chance, although I don't see the chance of success. Where would you lean on the idea of revolution or reform, on like what's happening, or like how can we try to lean more on reform than revolution?
How can we? I don't know. I feel kind of pessimistic on that subject.
# loaded question.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, I think like revolution is kind of necessary as far as that goes as well, just because it's going to be quite a big problem, especially for like, you know, Trump saying that he's going to bring jobs back that are probably immediately going to be lost, or like pretty soon going to be lost. Like, a lot of supporters of him are going to be upset, and hopefully that will change something. But I don't know. It's hard to see any reform coming. I don't even know how to conceive of anything like that, just because it's, like I said, I don't think that the system has any interest in reform.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it's all right that it's like beyond us, because that's like part of why like this is important. It's like we need to collectively talk about it and think about it, and like kind of collectively figure it out, because this problem is none that we've ever encountered in our history.
Yeah, we don't have the answers.
Yeah. Like, me and you as Tony and Dylan definitely do not have the answers. And we could extend this quite a ways to our sphere of influence, and I think we still wouldn't have the answer. So,
because it's, I mean, a problem that we haven't faced. Like I said, I think like a lot of the repercussions of what's coming are things we can't even conceive of right now. Like, even the things we've talked about as being potential problems are only a slice of things that could happen. I'm sure there's a number of things that we can't even think of right now that could come about. So it's hard to really even say, because we just have never experienced anything like that.
Wait till we get into a super intelligence episode.
Yeah.
Uh, but God, I want to do this, but at the same time, I'm so like aware of how hard it's copying the video. But I do really want to mirror this because that was a very important part to why the video was so good to me. Was at the end of it, CGP Grey, I feel exactly, well, obviously not exactly, but I feel like I know how he felt when he made that video and decided to add that last bit in, which is like, I don't want this to spell like doom and gloom. Like, that's not what we're here to do. Like, we do that enough as people in our everyday life. Like, I really want to focus a lot more on like the ideas of like what can we do as people, even if that is something that we don't know. Like, I don't mean it as a rhetorical question. Like, I don't mean to ask it in a way that's like, oh, we don't know what to do, we're doomed, we're screwed. Like, I very much mean to ask it in like a self-searching way, and I've been asking myself this for the past 5 years, and I'm not that smart of a person, so I can only find my way through so much. But like, what can we do as a society, and how can we start to preemptively adapt ourselves to be ready for this future? And it's kind of a tough question, and it's a question that we don't have the answer to, but asking it and searching for the answers, I think, is very important to our very near future and how we will end up as a society.
I guess, as I sort of mentioned before, one of the really kind of take-home things about humans need not apply is just that, regardless of your stance on it, this kind of thing is coming, or, maybe even if it's not inevitable, it's important to talk about the possibility of it coming at all. And really, I think we ought to just start having these conversations, and as a society, talking about, if this happens, what do we do politically? What do we do in our personal lives? What comes after, etc., And so I guess just with that, some questions for you all is, what jobs do you think can or will survive the robot revolution? Are there any fields that humans can excel in better than robots? And then, since we talked a lot about creativity in this podcast, which we kind of didn't intend on, but just kind of interested to hear all of your thoughts about where, if at all, is the room for creativity in a society of automation that can, like we talked about Google Dream, that can create artistic pieces. Will creativity become obsolete in a way? Just what are all of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I guess like the end to this is like, it's important to think about for yourself, but it's also important to get other people thinking about it. Go out there, grab a stranger at a bar, force them to talk to you about automation. I don't know, talk to your coworkers about it. Yeah, shake them up. Spread our term of auto-official, because I actually like that, and if someone found the actual word for it, then definitely message me, but in the 2 minutes I tried to look, I couldn't find an actual word for things made by robots. And I'm kind of liking auto-official right now. There's a few other ones I'm thinking of, but for right now, that's my favorite one. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the take-home points of this episode I wanted to drive. Tune in next time for Casual Conversations, the podcast, episode 4, which is Overanalyze and Chill, episode 2, which is going to be about also episode 2 of Black Mirror, the episode that is 15 million merits. It kind of depicts a future where, it ties into this idea that reform isn't possible, so revolution is inevitable, kind of, in a small sense.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too far into it because that's what the next episode's for. Make sure you guys watch it beforehand. I mean, we'll give spoilers warnings then too, but I'm going to give a preemptive spoilers warning now and say that we're not holding anything back. So make sure you watch it before you listen to us talk about it. Are there any closing statements?
I guess to close this one out, I'd like to read a quote from one of my favorite robots, Bender B. Rodriguez, which is "Kill all humans." And that, we'll just leave you with that.
Yeah, so thank you guys for listening. Tune in next time. See ya. For now, you could listen to us on SoundCloud and YouTube, and reach us on Facebook and through our email account at casualconversationsthepodcast@gmail.com.